So definitely want to hear your reactions about how has the world changed because of Ukraine, because it implicates, I think, not just Ukraine, not just Russia and NATO, but really the whole world has been incredibly impacted by this, what really has been a reckless move on the part of the U.S. and, of course, all of its very servile allies.
Well, absolutely. Well, the first thing to say about those comments, which is, I mean, that they were apparently impromptu, or at least they seem to have been. But the point is, Biden seems so angry when he says them. And why is he so angry if he really does think that nobody wants to change places with Xi Jinping? The anger actually gives it away. The real problem Biden has is that he knows perfectly well that the truth is the opposite to what he's saying. Xi Jinping has just been, a few weeks ago, he was in Saudi Arabia. He was meeting with MBS, the Saudi leadership. He's cutting all kinds of deals with the Saudis. Saudis are no longer saying that they will only accept dollars for their oil. They're prepared to accept RMB, Chinese currency, in return for oil. The other Gulf states were there too. So, you know, the Saudis, the Middle East, Egypt, one of these countries, former staunch allies of the United States, they're not coming to the plate in the way that Biden says. You were talking about Africa. You were talking about all of these African countries. France is a former French empire, French colonial empire in West Africa, which the French have basically been running in a kind of stealthy way ever since these countries were given their supposed independence. Now they really are breaking away. They're making their own moves. The Chinese are also big in Africa. Of course, that's the other thing to understand. I mean, we complain about the Russians, but the Russian presence in Africa compared to the Chinese is, I won't say it's minuscule, but it's very small. It's China that's the big country that's coming into Africa and cutting the big deals. We see Lula, who's keen to now develop relations with Brazil. He wants to re-energize the BRICS. We see Modi in India, who seems to be working towards some kind of a settlement of issues with the Chinese. And of course, he is very friendly at the moment with the Russians. So when Biden gets angry in this way and says, who would want to change places with Xi Jinping? What he's really showing, and what the world sees, by the way, sees outside the Western bubble, is a very angry old man who knows perfectly well that the truth is the opposite. With Biden, this is a fact that's been commented upon. Xi Jinping actually said it to him directly. What you say and what you do, or what your administration does, are often diametrically opposite to each other. So you see Biden saying one thing, and by the way, just to quickly add, unbelievably rude about Xi Jinping. I mean, first he says he's going to work with Xi Jinping on things that are in American interest, and at the same time, he's so incredibly rude about Xi Jinping. And of course, if the Chinese say anything about the United States or about Biden, well, that's, lèse majesté. We can't accept that. But he's unbelievably rude about Xi Jinping. He's incredibly angry, and he's angry because he knows that the reality is the opposite of what he says. It's, as I said, characteristic of the man, and all the world knows it.
Yeah, I agree with what Alexander said. When you go back and listen to that statement, it very rude, very, very rude. And I just don't know what triggers Biden. It's really bizarre. He talks very, very slow and very low at times, and then something triggers him, and he just loses it. And the fact that the world is cutting deals with Xi Jinping is really upsetting him. And that's the reality of it, because world leaders do not like Biden. Erdogan doesn't like him. Netanyahu doesn't like him. Xi Jinping doesn't like him. Putin doesn't like him. Modi doesn't like him. No one likes Biden, and even the EU leaders. I'm positive they don't like Biden either. They're just terrified of the United States. They're hostages to the United States, and they're too weak to do anything. But no one likes Biden. No one wants to deal with him. And he understands that. And the big lie that we were told was when the Biden administration got into office, the big lie was the grown-ups are now back.
Yeah.
The grown-ups are back, and the world is going to hum along because now the professionals are here. It was a complete lie. And I thought the statement that Biden made at the State of the Union was very, very rude. What president does that? What president gets up there in front of the United States, in front of the world, and has a fit like a 10-year-old? This guy's more popular than me. People like him more, but everyone should love me. They should love me more. I'm more important. I'm cooler. I'm better.
And they call Trump a narcissist.
Yeah. I was shocked when he went off on that tangent, to be quite honest, and it was very embarrassing. And then the fact that he's doing this during the most important speech of the year it just shows that there's no self-awareness at all. These people need therapy. I said this in a video a couple of days ago. Someone needs to sit all these people down and just tell them, let it go. Let all this Russia stuff go. Let all this China stuff go. Let it go. And start acting like an adult. Guy's 80 years old.
Yeah.
And he's yelling about the president of China.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's so infuriating because it's embarrassing, and it has real implications, we know, because it is a reflection of this arrogance and then this desperation has consequences, right? The US is also, it's not only, Washington is not only trying to go up this escalator with Russia and Ukraine, but it's also looking at Ukraine as a potential lesson I wrote about this on my Substack. There are all of these neocon hawks, especially ones attached to Biden and Obama. They were in Foreign Policy magazine drooling over the Taiwan implications of what Ukraine could mean, bragging about how they've defeated Russia. Now they can do the same to China and Taiwan, and here's how you do it. But this statement about Xi Jinping, along with the Balloon Gate fiasco, it's an interesting dichotomy to watch, where you have globally, the U.S. is standing. I think the reason why Joe Biden didn't want to talk about world affairs was because Ukraine is not going so well right now for Washington. And also world affairs aren't going so well for Washington. They can't even keep Saudi Arabia entirely in their camp when they had thought, that Saudi Arabia was their poodle. But now Saudi Arabia is saying, no, we're going to do exactly what we want. We'll keep relations with you, but China is a huge deal for us, and we're going to, host this historic China-Arab summit. Never happened before. Arab State Summit. Never happened before. So you couple that with BRICS, couple that with all of these developments. The U.S. is obviously looking so much weaker, and it felt like Biden was like projecting and was just so triggered by this reality that his speechwriters obviously didn't want to acknowledge at all. But he couldn't help himself, it seemed like.
Well, I think that's exactly correct. And that's exactly where we are. But of course, it's very dangerous at the same time, because at the same time as we see Biden so angry, we also know the lengths to which he's prepared to go. And this is where we go back to Nord Stream and, an illegal act attacking the economic infrastructure of one of your own allies, because Nord Stream is more important to Germany than it is to Russia. You're prepared to do that when you're as angry as this, when you are as frustrated as this, when you are as, frankly, as out of control in your language as this. What else are you prepared to do? And you have this balloon incident. Now, I don't know what the truth of this balloon was, whether it was a spy device or whether it was, a weather balloon. I mean, I have no way of knowing one way or the other. But the fact is, the United States is the country that spies on more people than anyone else on the planet. It sent balloons, weather balloons, over other countries in the past. This is the reaction to that was so off the scale, hysterical, and this vast assembly of forces committed to shooting this thing down. I mean, it was so ridiculous in some ways. I mean, the United States, as you correctly said, came across looking so ridiculous. The president of the United States came across looking ridiculous. And at the same time, we see that he's an angry man, an angry old man, in a hurry. I have to say that. And also a very reckless man who's prepared to take incredible risks as things increasingly go wrong for him. What will he do next? He's got all this infrastructure that the Chinese are building all over the world. Is he going to start looking for ways to attack that? Is he going to start looking for ways to attack infrastructure of other allies? If the Saudis, for example, send oil to China on tankers and are receiving money in RMB, will those tankers suddenly get blown up in some mysterious way? I mean, we are in a very dangerous situation, and we can laugh at this, and we should do, because it is risible at one level, but we shouldn't be blind to the dangers of it as well. And by the way, I think that this is something that both the Chinese and the Russians are very well aware of. And I think that the Chinese certainly are extremely well aware of it. And it's interesting that the Chinese have been very, very restrained in response to these bizarre comments that Biden has made up to this point. So at one level, they know that, this person triggers very easily, but they're going to be taking precautions, and they're going to be looking at ways to secure themselves. And of course, this is going to accelerate the very trends that Biden wants to slow down. And that, of course, might make him overreach even more.
Yeah. I never imagined that. I mean, I knew Biden was going to be bad, but I never imagined that he would do this much damage, to be quite honest. I mean, we talked a lot about a Biden presidency. Me and Alexander would do shows and talk about what's in store for the world, because mostly we're focusing on the foreign policy side of things with the Biden presidency, but we never imagined it to be this bad, this reckless. And going back to what Alexander said with the Seymour Hersh article and the blowing up of critical infrastructure, the last couple of sentences of that article, I believe the source was asked a question. Seymour Hersh's source was asked a question. Why? The first question he was asked was, what do you think of Biden doing this? And the source said, whatever you may think of Biden, I'm paraphrasing here. The source said, whatever you may think of Biden, he's got some balls to do this. That's what the source said, to go through with this. So he said the guy's, he essentially was saying the guy's crazy. I mean, I can't believe he actually did this. And then he asked the source, what do you make of Russia not retaliating yet? And the source said, perhaps Russia, in a cynical way, perhaps Russia is saying to themselves, well, if the U.S. is now blowing apart critical infrastructure, I guess, this is the world we live in. Now, we could do the same, and China can do the same, and India can do the same. I mean, is this where Biden has taken us? Did all of these people not think about what this means for cable communication and internet communication, satellites, tankers? I mean, where are we going now? Where is all of this heading towards? Because Biden one day decided, I'm going to blow up that damn pipeline. Well, if the U.S. can blow up pipelines, well, I guess everyone can blow up stuff that they don't like. Is this where this world is heading towards? Because that's the Pandora's box that he's opened. And I know the media is going to try to demonize Sy Hersh. They're going to try to to memory hold this story. They're going to do all of these things, but a lot of people are going to read this article. A lot of people, and a lot of leaders are going to read this article, and they're all going to take note. This was a big deal, and the Chinese are going to read it, and the Russians are going to read it, and the Indians are going to read it, and the Germans are going to read it, and the Germans may want to close their eyes as much as they want, right. But this is going to cut.
Yeah. Well, maybe to close, I definitely want to. There's been a lot of folks sending questions. I definitely want to get to them before we conclude here. But I want just your impression on something I was thinking about as we both were talking. So one of the things that has struck me as Russia's special military operation, or just a military operation at this point, and how it's gone this year period. One of the things that struck me about these global changes that have been happening, which arguably predated, of course, this special military operation. And they've been going on for years. Russia and China strategic partnership, this multipolar world, de-dollarization, all the things we've touched on a bit here. They've been happening for a while, but really accelerated during this time. And one of the things that struck me is how, if the United States sees itself as this empire, as this kind of hegemonic power, as the dominant world power, the superpower of the world, it feels like this world situation has never looked more unfavorable. So the danger for me, as you said, Alexander, with how dangerous this is that people like Biden, the people like Victoria Nuland, they see these developments as just existential threats. There's no capacity to cooperate around that. There's a reason why the United States never picks up any invitations from Russia or China about any of these projects that they have going on. It's not like they have not been invited. Years ago, they were all invited. The entire collective was invited, and the United States said, absolutely not. We're not going to be party to anything that's China-led or Russia-led. And so with that, this desperation, this like Biden being triggered, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, this desperation is dangerous in the sense that there is an unfavorable world situation in front of the United States. They can't get their way in the same way that they once were able to. And I think Ukraine is no more larger of a flashpoint, not just for this greater war that is incredibly dangerous that's being built up between Russia and the United States and NATO, but also for what the United States is willing to do, given that it's looking at the landscape and saying, especially the neocons are saying, well, this is not going well for us. We can't stop Russia and we can't stop China. The economic forecast for this year alone, I think, tells the tale. You have the U.S. 1% or less. There's, I think, a little bit of optimism for this 1.4% from the IMF. Europe, basically zero growth all across the board. Germany, negative growth. And then you said, Alexander, Russia will have positive growth. It's not huge, but it's positive growth amidst record-breaking, just awe-striking sanctions, like historically. And you have China, 5-6% now. That outlook, given that the COVID restrictions are mostly unleashed and released, there's more and more optimism about China's growth. So even that alone is, I think, reason to panic if you're the neocons saying, well, how are we going to dominate the world forevermore? The end of history seems like is history at this point.
I think this is exactly correct. I mean, can I just come back to your point about Africa and about the fact that you have all these West African countries now, bringing in the Russians and booting out the French. And Macron and Borrell says this is because the Russians are going there and they're buying on the cheap influence of these countries. No, it isn't that at all. It is precisely because countries like Africa, these African countries, are seeing the global realities. They've been resentful of the fact that the French have been there for a very, very long time. They sense that the French are weakening, that the West is weakening. And now this is their opportunity to throw the French out. It's more important for them that they throw the French out then they bring in a couple of dozen people from the Wagner organization in. It's not the Russians, it's the Africans who are making these decisions. Of course, the Europeans can't bring themselves to accept that. The Americans can't bring themselves to accept that. But that is the underlying story. And it goes exactly to what you said. The United States and the Western countries that have connected themselves to the United States are faced with a situation where their influence, their global hegemonic influence, is weakening. And given that this utterly disastrous idea has been allowed to take hold within the United States' political and foreign policy establishment, that for the United States, loss of this hegemonic status is somehow existential, that it will somehow, in some way that I've never completely understood, be disastrous for the United States itself, for the American people, that it will make. I actually read an article which was actually about China, but it was by a neocon, and he said that the danger is that the United States will become a normal country. I mean, why this is something to be afraid of? I just don't understand. But anyway, given that they have come to this belief that there is this need for the United States to perpetuate itself indefinitely as this leading power, and that they think in these existential terms, we come back, where will they stop? And Alex has got this completely right. I mean, they're prepared to do incredibly reckless and dangerous things. And of course, the risk is that we're going to get into a spiral. So, the Americans blow a pipeline here, the Russians blow up the cable connections there. And that this is not impossible. It would be unwise, I think, especially where the Russians are concerned, who've had to endure an awful lot, far more than the Chinese have done, to gamble forever on their restraint. Now, having said that, let's assume that we avoid, an even bigger crisis as a result of this reckless activity. The other danger, and perhaps a lesser danger, is, a lot of people talk about American decline. If you link the entire future of the United States to the maintenance of its hegemonic status, you will actually get an absolute decline. Whereas if you just accept the fact, do what Alex says, say, let's stop worrying about China, let's stop worrying about Russia. These countries are doing well. Good luck to them. They're doing well. We should aim to do well. Perhaps we can work with them. Perhaps that way we can do better for ourselves. Then there is no need for there to be an American decline. A decline is one of those words. I speak in Britain. I know of what I speak. Britain, of course, being the imperial power before the United States became the great world power. Decline is a very dangerous concept because you can talk yourself into it. You can structure your policies. You can do all sorts of things to yourself, which bring those about if you try to maintain your position, an unsustainable position, indefinitely. That was what the British did. And Britain, of course, has never, it's now very much in a sense of malaise, and it's beginning to understand the implications of this. But that's a danger for the United States as well. And that, if the neocons continue to have their way, is actually, this is perhaps the saddest thing, the most optimistic outcome. If the neocons have continued to have their way, we could have far worse outcomes than that one. But the most optimistic outcome is that we will actually see a real absolute decline because the United States is investing too much of itself and taking too many risks, trying to perpetuate itself as a hegemonic global power in the way in which it is doing. And if I was an American, I would say, look at Britain, come to Britain, see the situation here. And if you do, you will understand the dangers that you are in from what might very well become for you an optimistic scenario.
Yeah, they're risking everything with American taxpayer money, and they're risking the future of the American people for all of these hegemonic adventures that they have floating around in their head. And they understand, I think a lot of these neocons understand that the minute NATO stops expanding, the minute the European Union stops expanding, or the minute the IMF cannot, go to countries and put them under financial servitude, then the business models make no sense. The business starts to stop and it starts to recede, and they understand that. And NATO knows, for example, that if we can't break through in Ukraine and then continue to expand further east across Eurasia, what good are we anymore? And then you get into the questions of why then should the U.S. be spending $800 billion on the military? For what? Isn't that money better spent on the American people? Well, then the military-industrial complex companies start to say, wait a minute. We've been doing really well for the past 50 plus whatever years. You just can't take away this budget from us. All of this stuff, the minute the expansion stops is when everything starts to unravel. And right now it's hit a brick wall. And that brick wall is Russia and China. And it's bricks, brick wall, and it's bricks. Yeah, exactly. And this is formidable for the United States and for the West, because they've never run up against something like this before, and they don't know how to deal with it, and it's showing. And the person that they have leading this confrontation with this brick wall is Joe Biden.